I am Jessie Collins. I'm the marketing director at Rayhow Industries, and we have been in producing polymer materials for over 75 years. We're a global manufacturing company specializing in polymer materials with over 70,000 employees around the world, mostly in our manufacturing facilities. And the particular division that works with all of you is our millwork and cabinetry division. And we like to pay attention to details just like you guys. That's our thing, that's our motto. Particularly in best-in-class edge banding that you saw at California Closets yesterday with one of our premier products, our Rayhow Laser Edge, the zero-joint edge band that you apply with a hot air or laser or NIR edge bander that really puts that invisible edge on your final panel product. Or what you saw at in the showroom yesterday, our Ralvisio surfaces materials. So we specialize in more niche, high-end, specialty surface material types that you can get from us in a panel product, an edge band if you want to do it yourself, or custom cut to size doors, components, and end panels, whatever you need, all from Rayhow. So if you have any questions, grab me at lunch. We can talk through it. So wonderfully excited to be a part of this organization. You guys really do great work and are such a collaborative community, and enjoy being around you all. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Okay, so Doug Tatum is the chairman of Newport LLC, a national partnership of CEOs and senior executives who advise emerging middle market companies and assist private equity firms as they invest in and grow portfolio companies. He is also the managing director of TIP Seed Fund LLC, a newly formed seed stage venture capital fund with investments and investment rights in a diversified portfolio of companies. Doug's new book, No Man's Land, Where Growing Companies Fail, has won over 4 national Best Business Book Awards. His insights about the economy and business have been cited in hundreds of media outlets, including Inc. magazine, the Financial Times, and the New York Times Online. Previously, Doug was chairman and CEO of Tatum LLC, which grew into a highly respected national professional services firm with 30 offices and more than 1,000 professionals and employees. The company was sold to Sapphire in 2010. He is also a member of the teaching faculty at Jim Morgan College of Entrepreneurship at Florida State, as well as the advisory board chairman for the Business Dynamics Research Consortium at the University of Wisconsin. Doug will share his experience as a business owner, investor, and longtime student of business growth to help you make smart decisions about your company. Please join me in welcoming Doug to the stage.
Woo, I was negotiating with Amanda about whether I could follow Lois there. And I spent the last 30 minutes wondering if I should get, after her introduction of her husband, get rid of this pink shirt. You know, I was going to run upstairs and come up here in an undershirt. Nobody's going to take me serious now. Anyway, thank you for letting me come and share with you guys. I'm looking forward to this. I used to teach at a major university here in Nashville, so I've got some friends here, and I'm looking at a few eyeballs out here. They took me out last night and overserved me. I mean, they're really bad for me. So, you know, if you see me squint, I'm trying to see through the bubbles right now. Anybody else have a hard eat? Yeah, I'm looking at him over here. He's over here nodding. So, Let's get started. I'm going to talk to you about no man's land where growing companies fail. And I think that, as was indicated in introduction, I went the wrong way, or did I? Yeah, you were right. I did the same thing. You know, I did start a business as an entrepreneur, like many of you guys did. We grew it to a couple $100 million. We sold it. It's a large company. And that is completely relevant to this discussion, because the most important thing I want to share with you, and I'm going to share with you some data, it is absolutely legal, ethical, and good business to stay small and make money. You know, I get put on stages around the country, Inc. magazine, and what we make a mistake doing is putting everybody up here that grew large companies and then create that as an aspiration when that's nuts. So this book is about what you're going to face if you decide to grow. But I think the most important message I have for you is that it is okay to stay small and be a small giant. In fact, a buddy of mine, Bo Burlingham, anybody read anything by Bo Burlingham, The Great Game of Business? He's a dear friend of mine, wrote a book called Small Giants. And I think we make a big mistake, and growth itself is overrated, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to start off with a big picture look at companies, where you fit size-wise. I think I have an idea of where the majority of you fit. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what are the issues you would face if you decide to grow. And then I actually had all sorts of examples, but I'm going to pick on Lois's. How do you pronounce Lois? Lois. Lois. I'm getting close. There you go, Lois. There you go. And use her as an example, possibly. So don't go anywhere, okay? All right. Now, this is a diagram in the book. It was actually $1 million to get Dr. David Birch, who was at MIT, out of retirement. And he had a time series database, and I'm going to give you some information about it. Tracks every company in the United States for 20 years. In fact, we track your companies. I've got information on every one of you. But what I want you to look at is this diagram, which shows the business, the economics of this country's numbers of companies in 3 sections. You got the far left, which are smaller businesses, which is typically below 20 employees, okay? Then in between, no man's land is 20 to 100 employees, and above that is at financial scale. And I did have another PhD economist take a look at those companies between 20 and 100 employees in the last Great Recession, right? Everybody remember that one. About 3% of all the companies in the United States generated almost 1/3 of all the new jobs, okay? So you guys are, in many cases, if you're growing, you're the economy heroes. Large companies are shedding jobs. Little small companies are stable, or if they're startups, they fail. There's a lot of interest in high-tech startups, a lot of money going in that. The reality is companies like yours that grow generate the jobs, not high-tech startups, okay? They fail way more often than they get going. Now, let me show you a little bit of that data. Can y'all read that by chance? Can you see it from the back? If you think about it, we got rid of all the not-for-profits, out of the data. There's about 12 million companies in the United States, real companies like y'all. I want you to look at how few there are above 100 employees. From 250 to 500 employees in the United States, there's only 16,000 companies in the entire United States, okay? Above 100 to 240, there's only 90,000. All right, and you can see these red on the right because industries are consolidating based on, it's really the private equity industry, something that my old firm did a lot with, is consolidating industries, okay? They're buying up competitors, making them larger. But the point of this is there's a reason there are so few large companies, and it's called no man's land. It's what I wrote about, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I've made every mistake in the book that I wrote about because we took an idea from one person, 2 persons, my brother and I, and we ended up with 1,400 people, okay? So there's a reason we did that. We had to do that, and we're going to talk about that. Now, and kind of to get you to think about this, I'm going to have you put on a set of glasses called the 4 M's, because what you're going to find is regardless of what part of this industry you're in, you're going to see transitions in your market, your management, your model, and your money. And so we're going to use that to kind of explain the kind of things you're going to see if you decide for some reason that you need to grow and scale financially, okay? And we're going to start off with the market in. Now, this is a picture of innovation, all right? And I'll use Lois's business as a kind of an example here in a second. But I actually got an invitation to do a speech I'll tell you about in a second. But this is in the book, and it's a picture of somebody messing up and somebody cleaning up. And innovation happens, and you guys are experts at it, when one of your customers comes to you, say it comes to Lois and says, Lois, can you do an entire restaurant? And she looks carefully into their eyes because, as you said, she's out there. She answers the phone. She says, absolutely, we're an expert at that. And she's lying, all right? How many of us have gone to customers who ask us to do things that we haven't done before and said, yes, we can do that? Raise your hand. Or raise your hand high, guys. Look around the room. Everybody's got their hands high. That's how you grow, right? Now, what's remarkable is you're really good in meeting those promises you were talking about, okay? Your instincts are such that you go, okay, I think I can do this. I'm going to act with confidence that I can do this. And the next thing you know, you end up with a new customer. Does that make sense? Now, I got a phone call from a group, and they wanted me to do a speech at a place out in Colorado. Happened to be a very nice resort, very good time of year. So I said, sure, I'll do it. And I didn't check in. They weren't as organized as Amanda, making sure that I knew who I was talking to. And so about 2 weeks before I do the speech, and there's 1,000 people in the audience, right? And I said, they had a call put together. My assistant said, I don't recognize the Industrial Research Institute. So I don't know who you're talking to. You better get on the phone with them, right? So anybody heard of the Industrial Research Institute? Well, neither had I. So I get on the phone with these gentlemen at the time, and I said, well, who's in the audience? And they said the heads of R&D of the Fortune 2000. And I go, oh, this is not good. This is not good. I'm an expert on businesses from 20 to 100 employees and the changes they have to go through. And I said, we need to get another speaker. And they go, what do you mean? I said, this is going to be a failure. This is worse than a pink shirt after how her husband introduced you. And so they go, well, you're on the program, big boy. So if you're going to go down big, right? So what I did is I put this up. This was the opening slide. And I explained to them that innovation happens when somebody in an organization makes a promise for something they've never done before. And then I announced to them that they can't do that. They're out of business, okay? And as it turns out, and I went in to explain why they couldn't do and why they couldn't replicate the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And they actually published the speech because I was right, and they buy all their innovation. They wait till somebody like you comes up with an idea, scales it, and then they go buy it from you. All right? So the first thing that you need to understand about this transition is that when you are at human scale, like you are right now, one of the things that allows you to grow is you're very simple to do business with, right? I go to Ken, I ask Ken, this is what I need, and Ken manages those operations simultaneously with the promises, right? So in other words, you're making promises, but you also have a handle on what delivers those promises, okay? So you're real simple to do business with. Anybody ever here come from a large organization, work in a large organization? Anybody? Okay, the few of you that have, how many hours did we sit in meetings going, you've got to be kidding, we know what the customers want, but we can't swim in this peanut butter anymore to get it done. It's very hard to keep a larger organization simple to do business with. So Part of the issue of you growing is that what happens is you can't keep up physically at a certain size with all the stuff that's going on. Somebody comes in a suit and tells you, well, you just need to delegate. So you delegate to somebody who makes a promise. And you go, you did not make that promise. You got to be kidding me. There's no way we're going to get that done, right? That blows up on you. Or worse than that, you make the promises and you delegate the operational side, and they have no idea how to sequence the priorities to get done, the nuances of what you've got to do to get those promises made. And the whole business starts deteriorating. Anybody get a sense that they're too big to be small and too small to be big? That's no man's land. And as a result of that, you end up with this misalignment, and you end up losing that simplicity. Your revenues start stalling. You end up spending a lot of your time dealing with exceptions and problems, and you go, why can't I grow anymore? And that's the diagnosis of the issue. Now, what are you going to do to solve that? Fundamentally, this is the most strategic thing you got to think about as it relates to this staying small or growing. You guys are craftsmen. You guys know, it is remarkable the level of expertise in this room. I mean, in my mind, I'm sitting around with my buddies last night being overserved. By the way, some of them are former Navy SEALs. They're a rough crowd, And they basically, I was telling them who I was going to speak with and so forth and so on, and how I admired that. And they started reviewing my value proposition if the world comes to an end. And they said, we're just going to eat you because you're useless, you think I'm a professor, I'm a financial guy. So I'm useless. You guys survive, I get eaten. And so what's interesting about this is that you've got to decide, can you get your business good at what you're good at? All right, so I'm going to pick on Lois for a second. All right, here, what happens if she goes and designs a restaurant, and that restaurant is invested in by, she does a couple of the restaurants, and then all of a sudden a private equity firm comes along and says, okay, we're going to take this from 3 to 300. And you got to do this. All right? But you see what I'm saying? All of a sudden, that's a different business. She's got a strategic decision to make. You're either going to stay as a craftsman or an artist, and you're going to do extraordinarily well at that, or then you got to turn around and say, I've got to build an organization that can deliver what they're buying, that value proposition, at scale. If you can't do that, why in God's green earth would you grow? Why would you beat yourself in the head and say, I'm better if I'm larger, as opposed to I'm better if I'm more profitable? Does that make sense to you? All right. So that's the single strategic issue, is what is that value proposition? You guys were talking about a niche. What is that niche? Are that, those numbers of those promises you made? Sometimes your biggest customer, I'm a finance guy, My old firm was consulting CFOs. Okay, we were fractional CFOs, consulting CFOs for emerging growth companies, large companies all around the country, and the U.S. government included. All right, so I got to see a lot of different business plans. The bottom line is, what is it that you do that wins you customers? It could be you. It could be you. That's okay. But if you're going to grow beyond a certain size, you're going to have to figure out how to get the business good at what you do. Let me pick another industry outside of picking on one of your components here. Used aircraft parts. A guy came out of the audience. He says, I'm in no man's land. I'm in front of the customers constantly. I know what they want to do. I run operations. It's falling apart. What do I do? And I said, well, what are you good at? He said, I just need you to tell me how to get it, keep growing. I said, no, tell me what you're good at. He said, well, and this, to a certain extent this matters because you guys deal with contractors. He says, there's a group of contractors out there that refurbish jets. Then there's a group of facilities and companies that refurbish FAA qualified used parts, okay? And we had to talk about, you're not selling that crap to Delta because I'm on Delta and, you know, I live in Tallahassee, Florida during the school year, and if I go to heaven or hell, it's through Atlanta on Delta. So we had to get through that. But I said, okay, so there's a whole group of folks that refurbish parts, and you sell those to contractors who are refurbishing jets. So what do you do well? He goes, it's a weird answer. He says, I buy right. So what do you mean you buy right? He said, well, I'm so in touch with the customers. I know what they're going to need for their job. I go find those parts, buy them right, and I flip them to my customers. Does that make sense to y'all? So effectively, he's a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R. That's what his value proposition was. So if he's going to grow to any level, I said, you have to get a process in place that buys right, or your business will fall apart. Because if you don't buy right, your inventory goes up, your cash flow goes down, the whole thing blows apart. All right? So the first M is for you to think strategically about, is there a reason to grow? Why would I grow? What is unique about what I do that wins in the marketplace? And if I don't have something that I can identify, okay, that's scalable, then I need to go to sleep at night understanding that I'm going to be a small giant and make a lot of money and do well, but it's a different kind of business. All right? So you don't foolishly just grow for growth's sakes into that scenario. All right? Now, okay, let's go to that rule, to the management rule. By the way, this is data we collected from the Inc. Everybody familiar with Inc. magazine, the Inc. 2000? So this is polling them about how many of them, I call them CEOs, I call you CEOs, owner-operators, the entrepreneurs. How many of you believe your employees can actually tell you consistently why you win competitively? And 7% of the folks that surround these folks can articulate why the company wins, okay? You were talking a little bit about why you win. You're there. I think it has uniquely to do with your eye, the way you structure those kind of things. You can that, you could scale it, but it's not the same business. All right, now let's go to the management. Okay, now, Paul, who was up here earlier, talked about culture a lot. What's interesting about culture as it relates to where you guys are at human scale and then what you would face if you're going to go to a larger scale. And remember, I think Paul mentioned, he started dealing with some of this when he was 20 employees. Do you remember that? That's what the data on a large scale, a remarkable mathematician said, if you look at all the companies, they start having these issues at 20, and then they come out of it north of 100. So if you start getting around 20 employees, you're going to get a little sense of what I'm talking about. Well, the first thing is management and culture. What's interesting is everybody talks about culture, but you never hear anybody define it. But everybody blames it for something. So if you have an employee that you bring in and you fire them or you leave, I'm not talking about somebody that steals from you or burns the place down, just doesn't work out, okay? If you ask them why they leave, 9 times out of 10 they go, that culture, I can't get anything done in that culture. It's not the culture, it's the cultural problem. If at the same time I go and have lunch with a person that fired them, guess what they say? Well, you just didn't understand our culture. I mean, everybody's using the same term to blame why something doesn't work out, but then I say, well, what's culture? And I got asked by Bo Burlingham on a stage in front of a bunch of people to define it, so I said, what the hell, I'm going to define it. the culture is essentially made up of how decisions are made in a company, the rules for who gets to make what decisions, and who's in the inner circle. Who's in your inner circle? Now, you get a little larger, but right now you are defining people in your inner circle. So who's in your inner circle? When there's a big decision to be made, who comes in your office when you close the door? Could be your spouse, could be your accountant, could be usually a little larger. You're going to have a few people, right, that you have in your business. Your head of operations, right? Your maybe one of your financial people if you're a little larger. Paul probably has some of that. Now, what's interesting is when you are at human scale and you start to build that inner circle or your management team, there's a form of currency that you use called titles. And you hand out titles to people. And the ticket to that inner circle for you is loyalty. Right? Does that make sense to y'all? Now, loyalty is perfectly appropriate ticket to your inner circle at human scale. That's the way it is. These are the people that, well, I'll give you a story. I never will forget in our firm early on, one of our young administrative folks comes up to me and introduces me to his fiance. And they talk about they're getting married and they're buying a house. And I'm going, holy crap. I mean, I don't know if we're going to make it. This guy's building his life around this company. And the pressure that comes along with taking care of your employees is pretty amazing, right? I mean, you start these businesses a lot of times because you just can't work for anybody else, you know, and you have a passion for what you do with your hands as a craftsman or an artist. But then you end up growing the thing because you make these promises and you end up with employees, and then you wake up at one night and you start having to play chess because you're worried about whether you're going to make payroll or not. Anybody ever been there? Yeah. And that's a lot of pressure, right? Well, the affinity that you have for the people around you are based on the loyalty that they stood with you, they stuck with you through the thicks and the thins, right? They did what had to be done. And then as you grow, you tend to give them titles, and that's quite all right. In fact, the business kind of operates like third grade soccer. You ever seen third grade soccer? Right? You know, everybody kind of runs around and the ball kind of moves. You know, it gets done. Now, if you're going to go to the next level, here's the issue, and this is the most painful issue you'll face if you're going to grow a business to scale, is you have to change the ticket to the inner circle from loyalty to performance. Now, how hard is that? Let me tell you a story. I'm at a major university and I have real business people like you guys in the room, guys and gals. And I have students, MBA students, you know. Somebody asked me what I do at FSU and I said, I'm trying to stamp out ignorance. God help me, you know. You know, give me a scotch one night and let me tell you some stories. But anyway, we're sitting there and I'm trying to say, how do I explain how tough this is? And I picked on a young woman. What's her name? Jessica. It's like Jessica at the front of this big crowd. And I said, Jessica, she was a student, an MBA student. I said, who's your soulmate? You know, guys, you ain't it. But she's going to have a girlfriend that's a soulmate. You know, whoever is your best friend when you get mad at your husband or your brother or your dad or whatever the case may be, right? And I made her tell me her name. It's like Susie or something. She's freaking out like you are, going, why are you picking on me in the front of the thing? So I said, okay, so Susie's your soulmate. That's, you know, she's been irreplaceable to you as a friend. I want you to take her to the Starbucks on campus after my speech because you're graduating this semester. And she goes, yeah. I said, I want you to sit down with her and say, Susie, I could not have gotten through graduate school without your friendship. You have been indispensable to me. However, I'm graduating, going into the real world. You're no longer sufficient to be my friend. That's pretty tough, isn't it? Wait till you have to sit down and you're growing and there are people in your inner circle that have titles and everybody in the organization knows that you couldn't have got where you are without them. You cannot go to the next level with them. That's the toughest thing you'll face. Has anybody ever had to face that? Is that not the toughest thing you've ever had to deal with?
That and firing people.
Yeah, because guess what? They don't make the transition. Sometimes they have titles, you know. I've walked into places where they say, well, you know, this is a CFO. I had 800 CFO partners. We were the CFO. We were selected to be the CFO for Iraq by the Pentagon. I know what a CFO is. And the person you're calling a CFO is not a CFO. Might be an assistant bookkeeper. You know, these titles become issues. Try to take one away. But here's the issue. You have to shorten the decision cycles and times and lower the risk of decisions to get to the next level by bringing people in who've been there and done that before. And so you have to hire at the top. There's your navigation rule. You can't hire somebody to leverage your time if you're going to go to the next level. You have to give a piece of the business away to somebody, right? So let's take you again, Lois. If all of a sudden somebody comes in and said, "We're doing 300 restaurants," you're going to do them all. You'd have to pack your design stuff and say, "I got to protect that." What parts of the business can you delegate? It's going to have to be probably operational on the construction side and all the other stuff. You would have to literally go, I've got to protect, you know, this business is just delegating stuff. You have to protect what's unique to your value proposition and then turn around and say, I need a production executive who has run 10, 12, 15 jobs at a time, knows how to put subs together in multiple locations. You can't take the chance of taking somebody that, you know, has never done that if you had to explode to the next level. Does that make sense? Now, that doesn't mean you have to do that. I'm just saying if you're going to go to the next level, you're going to have to do that. And that's the navigation rule that you're going to have to follow around the management. Paul was talking about holding everybody accountable. What he had done is taken some of his decision rules and got real detailed about explaining them, right? Some organizations, you guys make all the important decisions. But you will find there are certain decisions you allow certain people in your organization to make. Those are unwritten rules, and people get to know what they are. But who's in your inner circle is the most consequential issue you have if you're going to go from a small giant to financial scale. Now, the financial model, okay? Now, this is interesting, I believe. It is to me anyway, because what people don't realize, business people, is that when you grow, your cost structures don't grow gradually with you. There's a point where you hit where you have to increase your overhead dramatically to get to the next level. Has anybody ever felt like, I got this strange feeling, I got to spend a lot more money to go a little higher in my revenues? Anybody? Raise your hands. Look around the room. Okay? That's normal. That's what you see. It's called stepped fixed cost. And what's interesting about it is, I took this as an example. I called up one of the private equity firms. I said, get the smallest company you can imagine that you've invested in and show me the revenues and then show me where you made the investments. I'll step down here so you can look at this. Revenues were below $4 million, but isn't that a beautiful trend? All the way on up over $12 million. That's a beautiful business, right? They had to spend a fortune in 2009 on overhead to keep that revenue going up at the same size. their costs didn't go up gradually. They went up dramatically to get them to the next side. And you got to have an understanding of that before you drive into that, because you could end up driving into a hole. And let me see, I believe this is a picture of it. Yes, this is disaggregated IRS data. Actually, it's aggregated IRS data. Disaggregated IRS data is illegal, but this was not an inexpensive little thing to get. This is everybody in the freight forwarding industry. Now, if I had a bunch of money, I could get everybody in this industry, and I could plot your profitability by revenue size. And my gut feeling from experience is that see that between well, you can't see, it's $20 to $50 million, nobody's making any money. You see that? Okay, where it goes down dramatically in that one area. Y'all's would probably be way below that. You know, maybe in that, somewhere in there, there's a no man's land where the infrastructure requirements and the ability to go out and sell and scale and all those other expenses means that you make money when you're smaller, but if you get larger, you can make more money, but there's this in-between stage. Nobody was making any money in the freight forwarding business because everybody over on the left was in one port. Y'all know what freight forwarding is? It's the guys that handle all the paper, businesses that handle all the paperwork to get your stuff into the country or out of the country, okay, at a port, okay? Now, everybody on the left side of that blank area where nobody's making any profits was in one port. Everybody on the right side of that was in multiple ports. Guess what we found was causing that no profit zone? Was that if you're going to go in more than one port, you had to compete a different way, which means you had to have an IT system, an ERP system, that was way, way, way more sophisticated and way more expensive so that you could compete with UPS and FedEx. And I will never forget, we got some family businesses here going into this company, and they had a it looked like one of you guys had done the boardroom. I mean, it was stunning, you know, and you had the picture of the great-grandfather, the grandfather, you know, and this poor guy had driven his business. He just said, well, I got to grow. If I do really well in one port, let me go to two ports. He goes to two ports. He drives all the profit out of his business because he's trying to get to 3 or 4, and every ant in his town was living off this business, right? And, you know, they're looking at I'm looking at these portraits, and I could just see him sitting there talking to him. Well, your great-granddaddy got it through the Second World War. Why in the hell can't you get a dividend out, you know? The pressure on this poor family guy to perform was unbelievable. He literally got emotional when he saw that. That's why I pulled the data. And he said, my gosh, if I'd have known, he'd have been better off to go buy somebody to get to the next level than he would have been to try to do that because he couldn't get the financing at this point. So the point of that is to make sure, you know where those dead zones are in your industry. The next schedule, I think, is going to be interesting because it was definitely I smoke a lot of cigars, in a nicotine-enhanced state to try to explain what causes some of these things. And let me give you an example. So while you're here at the conference, there's a little conspiracy going on. Your people are getting together and they're saying, you know, Brett made all these promises to customers. You know, we need to hire some people. You know, he's going to wear us out, and we really need to hire 2 people. So we're going to, when he gets back home, let's hit him up for 4, right? So they come in and they explain why seriously, we got to hire more people. You got to go hire 4 people. And then Brett sits down and says, yeah, but you know, if I sequence this and do this, you know, I really don't need to hire but 2. They walk out going, we got it. He walks out going, I got them all 4. And that's, you know, that stuff goes on all the time, right? Now let's say that Brett goes back and he walks in and they say, Brett, we need you to borrow $600,000. What would you say? You would literally go, are you crazy? $600,000. I mean, I got to pay that back. Where are we going to, create the cash flow to do that, Well, what's interesting is I capitalized a $20 per employee, $20 per hour employee in capital markets terms. At 8%, which is probably an interest rate we're going to get to here pretty soon. So if you take a $40,000 a year employee, you add FICA, FUTA, a little 401k matching, some health care, you're up there pretty close to $55,000, right? Would everybody agree with that? You know that for a $20 a year employee, that cash flow, I can pay off a $300,000 loan over 7 years. When you're at human scale, you tend to, when you have too much work, is hire employees because you view them as cheaper than capital, but they're not. And you could say, oh, well, yeah, but I can fire them, but you don't, because they get busy. All right? So we're now having you think in terms of economic models. Where does your economic model scale? Why would you grow unless you make more money? Why would you grow if you're going to grow yourself right into a dead zone because of the way the competitive dynamics of your industry are? Is pretty damn stupid. Y'all agree with that? Now, we'll talk about the money here in just a second. And then I got a little something I think you'll find interesting. I hope you do. This is a picture of a model. I think I actually used this when I did Senate testimony. I testified before the U.S. Congress, Senate side and House side. Complete other waste of time, but it doesn't matter. I had some really good exhibits, so I use them over. That was the value out of that. I can tell you a little story, depending on our time. But this is a perfect example of an economic model. It's called high performance cheap labor. What it means is your accountant shows you that you're making money, but you're not really making money because you're underpaid. You could make more money working for a competitor than you can in your own business. If you make money, then the only reason you're making money is you're underpaid. That's not a scalable model, right? You're going to work harder and harder and harder, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to make more money, but you're not really making any money, all right? So what's interesting is that as you grow, the intensity of this small team, which is what allows you to win work, as they mature and as the business matures, they're not going to work at that intensity and not going to work that cheap anymore. Everything starts normalizing, which gets you right back to the first M that says, I have to have something that's unique enough for somebody to pay me above my normalized costs for me to make money. You got to identify that. You got to think about that, okay? It could very well be your reputation allows you to get a higher price, okay? But that's not an excuse just to say I'm going to grow for growth's sake. All right? Some of you are going to run across a customer that's going to drag you into growth. You don't have any choice about it, and then you're going to have to start thinking, okay, if I'm going to continue to serve this one customer who's popping, or two customers that's popping out of the crowd, is this a one-off or is this a marketplace that I've figured out? Okay, and then you can scale. Now, let's see. That's the value, that's the rule right there. Very simple rule. Test your economic model to make sure that you make more money. Don't be concerned about your revenues or the number of employees. but look at your value proposition. Look at how you make money. Make sure you're not in high performance, cheap labor. And if you are, start trying to find your niche. Kelly, to your point. Okay? Now, money. I'll give you a very interesting rule, because we're going to wrap it up here in just a second. When you're thinking about your business, start thinking about the risks of the business. Because in the capital markets, and I am legitimately an expert in the capital markets, okay? What you find is that as you grow, there is a no man's land in the capital markets. It's gotten a little better. It's some of the stuff I testified for, but your ability to track capital is based on your personal net worth, right? You go to the bank, they're not lending to your business, they're lending to you, okay? You might have some collateral, but it's really around your credit score, your worthiness as a borrower. When you get to scaling, then all of a sudden, your business might need more money than you can afford to repay. There's like a capital gap there. The banks go back and go, we can't touch this, okay? That's a tough issue to talk about. And I think Paul brought it up when he was talking about the issue of, he shares his financial statements. Did y'all catch that with his, that's called open book management. If you want to go read a book on it, Jack Stack is a dear friend of mine called The Great Game of Business. And he built the most god-awful business you would ever, if you saw what he does, he rebuilds engines, you would say, who would ever get in this business? It's about an $800 million business. The reason he can make money at it is that every employee in that company knows how they contribute to profits, okay? Now, we tend to not want to share if the business is doing well with our employees, right? Because they might think we're getting rich. You know what the average, we've done some, I'll get to this second, we've done some polling. The average employee out there thinks that if, let's say you did $2 million in revenues. They think you make $1 million. They think you make half of it, 40 to 50% of it. The average public company makes like 4% after taxes. Okay, but the employees are uneducated about that, and they don't understand the difference between making money, which is accrual, he used that term, and cash flow, because there's a difference, right? How many of you get to the end of a really good year, and your accountant goes, this is how much money you owe, and you go, you got to be, I got no cash. How could I be making all this money and you know, still owe taxes? All right, there's no cash. There's a timing difference. One of the things you ought to be looking at in your business is to sit down and think about, what is the risk of my business? How do I get rid of the risk? Am I oriented around one customer? Okay. If I drop dead tomorrow, there is no value to the business. Okay. How do I deal with the issues of succession? I've built a reputation. How do I get this to where there's some value to this business going forward? Think about the risk, because you guys are entrepreneurs. You will come up with answers to that. Believe you me, if you literally think about the risks, would you buy your own business? Hell no. You know, why wouldn't you buy your own business? Well, I know all these, okay, well, what do you do to decrease the risk? Because in the financial world, when you decrease the risk of the business, what happens to the value of it? What happens to your access to capital? Goes up. And that's the navigation rule. Now, let me tell you one last thing. If we have any questions, be glad to take them. I was literally in, as I told you earlier, I was here for several years, and I was teaching at Middle Tennessee State University. I had this chair of entrepreneurship. I was an associate professor there. Anybody here know MTSU? It's somewhere around 30,000 students, so it's a fairly big school. You know, if I want to impress my Northeastern friends, I'd say I taught in Nashville, and they think it's Vanderbilt, but it wasn't Vanderbilt. All right. So I'm out there and I go into a student, it's about the size of this block right here. And they're eager young students wishing they weren't in my class. And I'm sitting there going, hey guys, let me ask you a question. I said, this is the first class I'm teaching entrepreneurship, if you can teach it. And I go, let me ask you a question. And I went to the board. Oops, wrong way. There it is. And I wrote 2 definitions of profit just off the top of my head. The first one I said is profit ultimately represents the amount that a customer knowingly provides a company for the value they've received above that company's cost. Not a bad definition, right? I'm going to pay Lois and her company more money than it cost her to deliver what she's delivering because I am buying a value proposition. Everybody agree? I'm buying your artistry. I'm buying your craftsmanship. I'm buying your reputation. I'll pay you more than your cost. That's a voluntary exchange. Then I went to the other end of the board and I wrote that profit ultimately represents the amount that a company receives above its cost structure to the disadvantage of its customers without their knowledge. In other words, everybody made a profit in this room, I'm hoping, last year. Then y'all just screwed the customers. That's how you made a profit. That's what profit is defined for. I asked the students, which of these definitions do you believe most accurately reflects how you guys make money? 67% chose number 2. Now, this is not Berkeley or Harvard. I've spoken at Harvard. This is not, I've spoken at, Columbia. This is like regular people, it's kids. Then I went out and did a survey across the general population, regardless of sex, religion, political affiliation. 64% selected number 2. I think it's really important in this now day and age where you have, I think Paul was talking about sitting down and talking to employees, is to let them know that the reason you make money is because as a group you're creating a value proposition and you are getting voted for, and that every customer has other places to vote, and teaching them a little bit about how profits are derived, which are different than cash. Cash follows profits, right? You can actually outgrow. One of the things I did in front of Congress is show them how you could have a really rapidly growing company was very profitable would be out of cash, right? Because it all ties up in inventory and receivables, and it takes time to turn. You don't get paid every 2 weeks like you pay your employees. FSU, in fact, I probably ought to talk to Amanda about this, but I designed a course called Profit Sense for entrepreneurs to understand how to read their financials and make sure they can communicate that to their employees. You might not necessarily have to or want to show everybody your profits. I'm not arguing that, but I can tell you, you need to talk about why you win and how important it is to make money, because that's the sustainability of your business. Yeah, Amanda talked to me about that. If anybody's interested, I'm sure we could we could create a tuition waiver from FSU for some of your members maybe. But we have to start doing that, or we're going to be don't send me any more students that are that stupid. I mean, it's driving me nuts, but it has an impact on your business, right? They got to understand that you got to go out and compete out there in a very competitive world, and that you win for a certain reason, and they're part of that. So that's it. The last thing I would say is, if I've been helpful, I hope I have, is that you will sit down and take a great deal of satisfaction at what you've built, not have a gun to your head to say, okay, Tatum grew this big business and he's on the stage and that's what's important. It is not. We had to grow because we were a partnership, and we found out that the faster we grew and the bigger we got, the more money we made, period. And so everybody said, we'll put up the capital, we got to grow. All right? Think carefully about, strategically about your business. Because while you're in here listening to me, there's like some bad stuff going on your email. I guarantee you. You know, it's like you got an email from somebody goes, you know, I said white and this is brown or something. Who knows? But you know, thinking through you know how your moms used to say, if you take care of the little things, the big things will take care of itself? That's bullshit. At your size, it's one or two bad decisions that kill you. And you got to think about your business strategically. And I hope you found this to be useful, because it's a privilege to talk to you guys. Anybody have any questions, let me know. Yes?
So, as a small business owner and entrepreneur, you know, funding, raising capital, I think that I'm not alone here in this room. You know, right now, things are pretty scary with the continued raise in interest rates that forces many people, myself included, to invest our own money, you know, for growth. And so, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I just was saying, for a small business owner, I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room. So right now, how do you grow your company when you need capital, when the banks aren't loaning? If you are going to get even an SBA loan, the interest rates are super high. So what other alternative other than using your personal savings?
So the question is, you got rising interest rates, the capital's more expensive, you're going to grow, it takes capital. You know, what do you do? Now, this is going to sound arrogant on my part, and it is oversimplified, but to a certain extent, it's not. Raise your prices and don't grow so fast. Make more money. I think to a certain extent, you guys are defensive about what your work is worth, right? And you might be surprised at what you can do if you quit thinking about revenues and start thinking about profits, and you think in economic model terms, and you go, oh, damn, you know, if I take all this work, I'm going to have to go to the bank and load up on debt, or I'm going to squeeze the cash balance down to nothing. Maybe I ought to raise my prices, scare some of it away, not do that, and make more money. Now, you might find that, oh, crap, they took it all. I still got as many, and I just raised my prices. Well, then you just covered the cost of your capital a little better. Does that make sense to y'all? Yes.
Those definitions of profit, can we get those?
The definitions of profit, can we get those? I'm assuming that, yes, Amanda can do that. Yeah. Ask your kids around the table to take that. And, you know, oh, you know, have a stiff one before you do. Yes, Ken.
Just a quick note or comment. When you talk about Lois's company going from 3 jobs to 300 jobs, you know, you talk, like, when it's no man's land like this. Some of us are trying to get our businesses to go like this, and we're going to hit no man's land if we keep doing that. Is one way better than another, or cautionary?
No, it's actually, what happens, it has to do with your span of control. It has to do with your ability to keep the business simple, both out in front of your customers and operationally. Some of you are like my buddies that are Navy SEALs. You got a pain threshold that's abnormal. It's like God knows, man, you guys are killing yourself. You know, so you're going to get to the point where you can't do that anymore. And that's when you got to step back and say, okay, you know, you're now getting into no man, because it'll start falling apart. And then you got to say, okay, what part of this business do I delegate? It can't be the part that is super important. You know, I will, does anybody know, God, what is her name? Well, I can't say this if it's recorded, okay? So there was a young woman that Inc. magazine wanted me to talk to. She was in the fashion business. To a certain extent, the fashion business is very similar to your business in that she had created this following around vintage clothing on the West Coast. You know, just people were going nuts. And you can't scale vintage clothing. You can't find enough of it. So now she's a designer, right? So she designs these clothes. She said, you know, the publisher said, you got to talk to her. We just did a big magazine article on her. She's in no man's land. This thing's going to crash and burn. So I get on the phone with her, and I go, what's going on? What are they telling you? And they said, well, they said I need to get a president in. You know, somebody, you know, I gotta delegate the business to somebody. And I go, what really matters? What are you good at? And she goes, I know what women from 25 to 40 want to wear, which I showed my wife, and she said I would never wear any of it. But anyway, literally, you know, she said I could wear it if I lost 400 pounds, you know. But anyway, the bottom line was, I said, you can't delegate that. You delegate that, what's going to happen to business? Oh, finally somebody said, if I delegate that, I mean, I even am concerned about the way the models look with the clothes, right? You know, all this detail. And I said, but what about the supply chain? Because all the stuff gets manufactured in China and Vietnam. She goes, oh my gosh, you know, that's killing us. And I go, do you have a competitor that's much bigger than you are in the online fashion? She named a couple. So why don't you go steal one of their operations executives? She goes, you can do that? I go, yeah, you can do that. Why would she do that? Well, because if she gets one of those people, the minute they walk in the door, what do they know? They know the systems you got to have. They know the pricing that you can negotiate. They know the vendors. You have taken the decisions that somebody that's homegrown is trying to make and learn to somebody that knows all those answers and knows who to call. You've speeded up the decisions and literally lowered the risk of those decisions. So you're going to gradually grow into a situation like you're being boiled like a frog, where you wake up one day and go, I got to let go of something. That gets you right back to deciding, what is it that we're really good at? How do we protect that? And then how do we delegate some parts of that business over to scale? But you cannot outwork bad strategy. You cannot outwork it. It'll wear you out. It'll kill you. Is that an answer?
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
I've got a question around pricing, and I'm curious if you, how you would encourage us to think about how we price our work. So one perspective is to look at what the market will pay and then think, I know I could get a little less than that, or maybe 5 or 10% more than that. I get the feeling that a lot of people in a group like this look more at like, these are my expenses and my cost, and I'm comfortable with just making this much money over that. So more of like our own expenses versus market. And then Jack Stack has a really good story in the book you referenced where he talked about going high when he got closer to commodity work, just to guarantee that his competitors would get the lower paying stuff, so he was more available for the more sophisticated things.
Jack's a dear friend of mine. And he can drink more Miller Lite than any human being you've ever met. It's all he drinks is Miller Lite. If you ever get a chance to say, you know, Tatum said that, you know, spreading rumors that, you know, his blood is Miller Lite. But let me give you one pattern I've seen and see if it has any usefulness to you. Because if you think about it in terms of model terms, you would not believe, look, I'm a CPA, I taught cost accounting to accounting majors. I'm I think legitimately an expert on economic models of growing companies. And I will tell you how many times that I go in and look at the model of the company and say, get rid of your biggest client. Fire them. And they go, what? Fire them. Because that's a one-off promise. They're eating your bandwidth alive. And you could be smaller and make more money. That might have some application to some of you guys. You got one client and you've used that client to kind of finance your overhead, and that's your comfort factor, but you're not going to get another client with the same requirements, and you need to call their bluff, because that might be the issue. Does that make sense? Because effectively you could end up scaling down your business having a more diversified customer set and making more money than getting eaten alive by one customer. Has anybody ever looked at that? Raise your hand.
Are you assuming because they have a lower profit margin on that large client?
I'm assuming that that effectively, if I was to do an activity-based costing, which you would never want to do, where I'd go just, put a clock on everything, that it's costing you more than you think it is. So even though you've given a discount to them and your costs are actually higher for them, they demand more bandwidth across the processes than you realize. Because when you look at that, you're looking at sales less gross margins. You're looking at price versus an estimation of your expected labor, right? Job costing. And you say, well, all that's in line, but you don't know what allocation of your overheads related to keeping those people happy. You don't know how much capital you've tied up in inventory for them. I don't know. So it'd be presumptuous on my part to say, go do that. Please don't go do that. Please go look at those issues and say, are we really making the money we think we're making on this client? Could I substitute half the bandwidth that I would get from them if they weren't here into these other businesses and make more money? You might have staff that you don't need if you don't have your largest customer, but gives you capacity to grow your other customers. I don't know. But that's where I would go play around with. Does that make some sense?
Well, I'm still kind of curious if you would rather push what the market can pay, or would you rather push what the market can pay, or make sure you're happy with covering your model? Like in a slippery slope kind of situation, I can see somebody in here.
Let me tell you something. Let me answer it this way, and I might not be able to get there. If you are in a commodity market, then your value proposition better be your processes, better outperform your other ones. In other words, if you are going to be a commodity player, then you got to look at your processes and say, I can run my processes faster, quicker, cheaper than anybody out there to make money of that. That's a value proposition. It ain't a pricing issue, it's your cost issue. If you're not in a commodities market, then you got to look at, why are they selecting me? Why are they selecting me? Okay, is it because I have a really good relationship with a few customers? But what are they willing to pay for that? What's my value proposition? So the pricing it's not just, I know what the market will bear for this, I'll do it a little less than that to get the business. Then if that's the case, and that's what drives your revenues, then you got to go back and look at your costs and say, do I have the you-know-whats to go out and take human capital costs and substitute it for machine costs, right? Because the way you're going to make money in a commodity markets is volume, but you got to get your process. What happens to somebody you hire at $20 an hour? 7 years later, is that person still at $20 an hour? Hell no. 7 years later, you paid off $600,000. You can start over again with equipment, but that's a fixed cost. So now I'm getting you to think in terms of economic models as it relates to how you conform to the pricing. Is that a little better? Okay. Any other questions? I'm between you and lunch. At least I'm not between you and a bar. All right, thank you so much. I hope that was helpful.
Well, thank you, Doug. That was incredibly informative and practical. Didn't Doug do a great job? So hi, I'm Norm Fink, and I'm representing Crow's Nest Software. I'm really, really pleased to be here. It's my first CMA conference. We're one of the newest members of CMA, just joined at the beginning of this year, and very proud also to share that we're one of your newest sponsors. We're happy to sponsor this great organization. So with that, I'm given the opportunity to introduce Crow's Nest Software to you, to share a little bit of information. Well, to that end, Crow's Nest is a project management ERP software. So what is that? Most of you have an idea about ERP. One of the biggest problems that we solve, even in today's world, in 2023, everybody's got computers on their desk, correct? And for our commercial and or residential non-supplier woodworkers in this group, typically you're having more than one person working on each and every project at a time. So everybody's got a computer on your desk and you have multiple people working on the same project, but are they all sharing the same information in their computers? No, the information is scattered amongst all these various computers within that company, within each project, and across all projects. That's one of the very first things that we solve with Crow's Nest. Crow's Nest becomes an infrastructure in your company from the beginning of a project through its life cycle toward the end. Okay, so on top of this infrastructure, we're also a platform of typical but yet nuanced woodworking functionality that is necessary to perform and execute across each project. Some of the areas that we are known for, more than anything else, is, well, incredible, robust estimating because there's all types of estimating that goes on amongst the various types of woodworking that is being performed within this group, and the ability to be able to adapt to that. Beyond estimating, and one of the biggest problems we hear every day of the week, scheduling. Everybody's got a problem with scheduling. We also can talk to you about many different ways of setting up your scheduling. And what's interesting about scheduling is how it also marries to your capacities. So we can manipulate different activities, but then do you have the capacity in your shop or in that area in your shop at that given time for that? This can be clearly visually shown to you and manipulated to fit each and every schedule. Best practice enforcement. We're talking about your business running as efficiently as possible. I heard some examples today about dumbing down some of your processes. That's exactly what you want to do. And then when you've done that and you realize that, yes, this few set of steps is absolutely our most efficient way through it, then you need a way of having those steps presented to the right person on that project that's responsible for that step at that time, because you're going to perform the same steps on every project. But every project has its own time frames. So if I'm performing step A on project 1, 2, and 3, step A is going to be due at a different time on project 1, then it's going to be due, maybe by a different person, on project 2 and project 3. Again, another part of what comes out of this capability, the ability to assign those tasks at the right time to the right person with the right due date to keep the project moving on time. Timekeeping. Everybody wants to know, where's my labor going to? The ability to put all this relative to each project and have that information collected for all the analytics, that all the stuff we've learned about this week, to be able to have that information at your hands. In fact, that brings up another expression that I've always gone by, and it's so true. You can't manage what you can't measure. So if you have the ability to get to the information you want, now you know how to go about keeping track of what's necessary. Real-time job costing, another area. Not accounting, how did we do, past tense, but how are we doing today? So this is another area that is all part of the platform capabilities that's sitting on top of this infrastructure. Change order processing and tracking. I can't tell you how many folks have said to me, we've got change orders galore, but we're so busy, we're leaving money on the table because we can't even track them, whether or not they've been approved or not, or whether or not we've collected or invoiced against that. And speaking of invoicing, progress payments and keeping track of that, and retention, et cetera, as well as your purchasing inventory. And there's much more, but these are some of the highlights. So within all that, what differentiates Crow's Nest? Well, it really comes down to about 5 or 6 things. Number one, customizability. That's really where we shine. The fact that you have 100% the ability to customize, to hone in, to create Crow's Nest for how you want it to run in your business, as opposed to, here, it's ready to go, start using it tomorrow. But oh, by the way, what you see here is what you've got. We're the opposite. Yeah, do we have stuff that maybe can get you started? But the infrastructure, the way that the program has been created is for you to have 100% the ability to tailor it to the way that you want it to run your business, not you to run your business around that. Can't overemphasize that. Then two other really indirect or intangibles that are so important. Scalability and extensibility. Why is that so important? Well, scalability. Crow's Nest or ERP type software, whether it's ours or someone else's, we're not talking Microsoft Word. We're not talking Excel. Then again, with Excel, you have Google Sheets. With Word, you've got Google Docs. In other words, Google Sheets, Google Docs, these one-off, one person at a time programs are plug and play. You can, don't like this one, take the next one. You already know what to do with it. We're talking about company-wide solutions, enterprise-wide solutions. And the time and the effort that you're going to invest to get this to run the way you need it to run your business, then you're going to be based and depending on this for the next probably 20 years. So you got to make sure that whatever you're looking at today has the ability to scale, to grow in 2 or 3 years, because you can say, oh yeah, I've looked at that and my God, you know, there's plenty of capacity in there beyond whatever I think I'll ever need. Well, guess what? In 2 years from now, I guarantee you, you're doing 10 times more than you ever anticipated when you first started. So will you run out of space and then you're stuck, you have to start all over? Or can it scale beyond really limitlessly? And that's an area that we will absolutely differentiate. As well as extensibility. You think about a spreadsheet. If you have a spreadsheet and you got, let's say, 10 columns, and that's what that software comes with. And you're saying, yeah, I love those 10 columns. We use them all. But here in our business, you know, we track 3 other things. Well, with Crow's Nest, you can create your own additional columns. We call them UDCs, user definable columns. You're extending the basic capabilities of the software. And then lastly, in terms of functionality, the cohesiveness. Let me give you a quick example. I was speaking with Glenn, who's one of our customers, and I said, you know, Glenn, did you realize if you're estimating in Crow's Nest, here we're tracking what is your material, what's your labor. And then when you're in purchasing, the estimating on that project can feed your bill of materials for what you need to purchase. Wouldn't it be nice for your purchaser to look at right then and there, because it's all in one place, it's not scattered amongst a bunch of computers. Wouldn't it be nice if the purchaser had visibility to exactly what the estimator's price was, what your budget is as you're buying it? That is one example of cohesiveness, and we can give you several others. The last thing is our business model. We are not a subscription. It's not a never-ending rental. Ours is a purchase. You purchase the license. You own it perpetually. So that is kind of a summary of what Crow's Nest is. We'd love to have the opportunity to share with you more in a much more detailed format of a customized demo. I welcome you to follow up with us, and we'll make that happen. To that end, I'm sure everybody's pretty hungry. I know it's kind of late, and I actually have a plane to catch myself. So I'd like to ask if Ken can come up and share a few words, and thank you all again for a great conference.
All right, real quickly before we wrap it up, a couple of things. Please do the evaluations for all the speakers and so forth. It really helps us and it helps you. And thanks again to Norm. I really want to, the board, Amanda, myself, we want to thank all the speakers. It was a phenomenal, I think, conference. I really give them all a round of applause, please. I want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do any of this without them. I appreciate that they came up here and gave us a little bit of a pitch on what they do and how we can all benefit from it. They're big supporters of CMA, so that's great. And lastly, really want to thank everybody for showing up, taking time out of their businesses to work on the business. And it's been a privilege. So let's have some lunch. One last note is if you can hang around for the pricing workshop, it's going to be an interactive type of thing. We're going to learn from each other. So I'm really hoping to see you guys, hear from you all. Matt and I will give our perspective on it, and I think it's going to be really helpful to everybody. So really hope to see you here afterwards. Thanks.